As the frontier moved westward across the continent, a new figure slowly emerged from the dust and the open plains. He was not a king or a general. He was not a politician or a wealthy merchant. He was often a quiet man with a horse, a rifle, and the long horizon in front of him. This man became known as the cowboy. The cowboy was born from necessity. Vast cattle ranches stretched across the plains of Texas and the territories beyond. Herds numbering in the thousands needed to be moved across hundreds of miles to reach railroads and markets in the growing cities of the East. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Cowboys spent long days under the burning sun and cold nights under the open sky. Storms could scatter a herd in seconds. A single mistake during a cattle drive could mean injury or death. Yet the men who lived this life developed a reputation that went far beyond the work itself. They became known as riders who could cross endless land without fear. Men who solved problems without complaint. Men who protected their herds and their companions when danger appeared. The frontier was not always peaceful. Outlaws sometimes targeted cattle drives or small towns that had little protection. In those moments, the cowboy was expected to stand his ground. Stories began spreading across the frontier about riders who defended towns and ranches against criminals and bandits. Some of these stories were exaggerated over time, but they carried a powerful message. In a land where law was still being established, the cowboy became a symbol of order. The image was simple but powerful. A lone rider appearing on the horizon, calm and steady while others panicked. A man who spoke little but acted when action was required. Over time, this figure became larger than life. Newspapers told stories of gunfights and standoffs in dusty streets. Traveling shows and later novels transformed frontier riders into legends. Men such as Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok became famous across the growing nation. Their reputations were shaped by tales of courage and deadly confrontations with dangerous outlaws. These stories helped create the myth of the Western hero. The cowboy was no longer just a ranch worker guiding cattle across the plains. He became the embodiment of frontier justice. A man who followed a personal code of honor even when the law was far away. To many Americans, the cowboy represented something deeper about the character of the nation itself. A belief that ordinary people could face danger without hesitation. A belief that courage and determination could bring order to chaos. And the belief that sometimes one determined individual could stand between a peaceful town and those who threatened it. In this way, the cowboy became more than a historical figure. He became a legend, a symbol of the frontier spirit that helped shape the identity of a growing nation. A man forged by hardship, by independence, and by the endless horizon of the American West. In the final decades of the 19th century, the American frontier was still a place where law struggled to keep pace with expansion. New towns appeared almost overnight along railroad lines and mining regions. Many of these towns were filled with opportunity, but also with danger. Outlaws, gamblers, and gunmen often arrived before any real system of justice could take hold. In that uncertain world, a few men built reputations as defenders of order. One of the most famous of them was Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp was born in 1848 in the state of Illinois. His family moved often across the growing American frontier, searching for opportunity in new territories. From an early age, he learned the realities of frontier life, where survival depended on courage, discipline, and the ability to face danger without hesitation. As he grew older, Earp worked many different jobs. He drove cattle across long distances. He worked as a lawman in several frontier towns. He learned the rhythms of the frontier and the types of men who lived there. Some came to build a future. Others came to exploit the lawless environment for their own gain. By the late 1870s, Earp had arrived in the booming town of Dodge City in Kansas. The town was a rough cattle hub, where thousands of cowboys passed through every season. Gambling halls and saloons filled the streets, and violence was never far away. It was in Dodge City that Earp began to establish his reputation as a calm and fearless lawman. Unlike many others, he did not seek trouble. But when trouble arrived, he did not step aside. His steady presence and willingness to confront violent men made him respected by some and feared by others. Later, Earp moved further west to a mining town that was growing rapidly in the Arizona Territory. The town was called Tombstone. Rich silver deposits had drawn fortune-seekers, gamblers, and opportunists from across the country. Like many frontier boomtowns, Tombstone quickly became a place where rival groups competed for power. Tensions in the town eventually centered around a group of outlaws known as the Cowboys and the lawmen who opposed them. Wyatt Earp, along with his brothers Virgil and Morgan, found themselves standing against men who had built reputations as dangerous gunfighters. The conflict reached its peak in October of 1881, near a small empty lot in Tombstone. The confrontation would later become known as the gunfight at the OK Corral. The standoff lasted less than a minute, but it would echo through American history for generations. Gunshots thundered through the dusty street as both sides fought at close range. When the smoke cleared, the outlaws had been defeated, and the legend of Wyatt Earp had begun to spread far beyond the frontier. Stories of the gunfight traveled across the country through newspapers and word of mouth. To many Americans, Earp became the symbol of a man who stood his ground when lawlessness threatened to take control. But the story did not end there. The violence in Tombstone continued even after the famous gunfight. When Earp's brother Morgan was later murdered, the struggle turned personal. Wyatt Earp formed a small group of trusted allies and began pursuing the men responsible. What followed became known as the Earp Vendetta Ride. Riding across the deserts and mountains of the territory, Earp hunted the outlaws who had attacked his family. One by one, the men responsible were confronted, and the message was clear. The frontier might be wild, but some men would still defend justice. In later years, Wyatt Earp moved through different parts of the American West as the frontier itself slowly began to change. Railroads expanded, towns grew into cities, the age of open ranges and gunfighters gradually faded into history. Yet the legend remained. Wyatt Earp became a symbol of the frontier lawman, a man who faced danger with steady hands and quiet determination, a man who refused to step back when violence threatened the people around him. In the stories told across the American West, the figure of Wyatt Earp stood tall, not as a conqueror or a ruler, but as something far simpler and perhaps more powerful. A man who believed that even in the most lawless places, justice could still ride into town. But the legend of the cowboy was never only about famous gunfighters or lawmen. The truth was much simpler and much more powerful. Most cowboys were ordinary men. They were young farm boys who had grown up working the land, sons of immigrants who had crossed oceans searching for a better life, men who owned little more than a saddle, a rope, and the determination to keep moving forward. They were not rich, they were not powerful. Many of them could barely read or write. But they understood something that every man on the frontier had to learn. If something needed to be done, you did it. The work of a cowboy was relentless. Before the sun rose, they were already awake, preparing horses and checking the herd. Long days in the saddle tested their strength and patience. Dust storms, lightning, and freezing rain were part of the job. Sometimes cattle stampeded in the night, thousands of animals suddenly panicking and running across the plains. In those moments, a cowboy had seconds to react. He had to ride directly into the chaos, risking being trampled in order to turn the herd and calm the storm. There was no applause, no crowds watching, no reward except knowing that the job had been done. The frontier demanded men who could stay calm when things went wrong, men who did not complain, men who simply fixed the problem and kept riding. That was the quiet code of the cowboy. A man kept his word, a man protected his companions, a man stood his ground when danger appeared. Those values were not written in any law book. They were learned through hardship and responsibility. And that is why the cowboy became such a powerful symbol for ordinary Americans. He was not a king or a general. He was a working man. A man who woke up early, worked hard, and faced whatever challenges the day brought. Many Americans saw something familiar in that figure. The factory worker leaving home before dawn, the farmer repairing fences after a storm, the truck driver crossing the country through long, empty nights. Like the cowboy, they were men who carried responsibility quietly, men who did not expect recognition, men who simply believed that when something needed to be done, someone had to step forward and do it. In that way, the cowboy became more than a rider on the plains. He became a reflection of the common man, a reminder that strength is not always loud. that courage is often quiet, and that the greatest legends are sometimes built by people who never expected to become legends at all. The cowboy was not born into greatness. He was forged by the land, by hardship, and by the simple decision to keep going, no matter how long the road ahead might be.